Good evening. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius. Germanicus is here. We're in our favorite wine bar by the Thames. It is very cold here in Londinium, 91 AD, unusually cold this early. The gods are toying with us. However, we have our second cups of wine. The centurions have gathered. The centurions, they're not properly dressed for this cold air, but they are tough guys. They're 25 years in the service of Rome, retiring to Londinium, and I guess they maintain the same sturdiness of temperament that they had when they were serving soldiers. We attract them now because we're delivering for them confidence that their sacrifice and that of their brothers in arms comes to something in the 21st century. We do not understand why, but Germanicus and I have the skills or the vision or the gift or the curse to be able to see all the way to the 21st century and everything in between. We hit a wall when we get to about 2030, 2050, somewhere in there. It becomes indistinct, perhaps because something went wrong, or perhaps because that's just the limits of what we can do. Right now, we're content to be here in Londinium, far from Rome. I mentioned that Rome is now in the grip of Domitian, the third of the Flavian dynasty, and he is unpopular among the Senate. Now, is he unpopular among the army? Unknown. Is he unpopular among the population of Rome? Well, it depends on what part. You're talking slaves, you're talking free people. Free people get bread handed to them. Slaves live badly. Much of Rome becomes slave power. So Domitian is variously popular. It will come to a bad ending, however. I mentioned that we set all this up because we're confident in speaking poorly of Rome and speaking poorly of Washington. No one's listening. Just you at home are listening to us. And who would believe a couple of, let's put it this way, men who don't work, the Greeks work for us, equus class Roman citizens in their 70s, sitting in a wine bar in Londinium who can see the 21st century. Nobody would believe that. So nobody's going to take us seriously. We're going to begin, of course, with events of these last days because Germanicus has had a clear vision of the Ukrainian contest since 22. And that vision is this: the one with deeper resources and more people wins. Okay? It's I don't need to use formal names here. You win in a contest in which there is military involved. You also win in a contest where there's trade involved. Big population grows fast, gets rich. Small population doesn't. Russia has a big population compared to Ukraine. Russia has ambitions compared to the buffer states around it. Ukraine had two decisions to make when the war broke out in 14: submit or resist. Ukraine chose to do neither. Now we're looking at the heroic stage, and Germanicus has been vindicated by events in the saddle. The puzzlement for me these last days, Germanicus, is reading those who were, let's put it this way, fervently pro-Ukrainian during the Biden administration, have now suddenly become, I don't know, the light is shining in their eyes. They see that Russia's winning, and therefore they're coming up with an example of how it is that Ukraine can be incorporated into the European Union and really should be satisfied with what they have. It's not a reversal of fortune.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sophisticated commentators coming to a position that's not yours. They don't speak in favor of Russia. They speak about something called realism. What am I reading, Germanicus? Good evening to you.
Good evening, Gaius. You know, the prime directive for every courtier, and, Castiglione brought this up with his book of the courtier in Renaissance Italy. Every courtier has to maintain their access to the prince. They have to maintain their credentials, their social standing, and they also have to maintain the authority that is the basis of their social standing, because the social standing was bestowed on them by the prince as a reward for not only their fidelity, but for being right. And so, in a situation where your counsel has been proven wrong, and where it can be argued that you knew it might head in that direction, but you argued for that anyway because you thought as a courtier, well, the emperor wants, or the prince wants everything to go in this direction. So let's reaffirm that. Let's reinforce what he wants, what he desires. And so being malleable to support the prince in terms of what he wants means that you also have to be malleable when things change. When there's a new prince, for example, a successor who doesn't want to go down that road anymore and who realizes that that road is a dead end. You don't want to lose your position, and you don't want to lose your authority. So you have the opportunity to rework everything without any sort of admission of responsibility or culpability. You manage to put it in a way that allows you to stay where you are, to keep your status and to keep your reputation. And so everything that's written is focused on that. And they're very good at that. They've been good at it for, well, they're good at it in our time. They were back in the times of the Greeks, when they had the big kingdoms after Alexander. It goes back a long time to ancient Egypt even. And so this is the story. And because public memory is so short, they can manipulate how others see them so that no one is going to be keeping close watch on things they said in another era. And so we saw this with the war in Iraq and all the wars in the Muslim world. The people who led us into disaster, the courtiers who created the policies and framed the courses of action, none of them were blamed for it. There might be one or two who had to retreat in disgrace, but for the most part, they just simply alter what was to meet the needs of what is, or rather what is wanted. And one of the best examples of that was the fall of the Soviet Union. And in 1990 and 91, even up to the very brink, all these people I knew in the Imperial city were still saying, oh, it'll never happen. The Soviet Union is too tough. I mean, in their minds, and as a matter of etched in stone U.S. policy since the late 40s, Russia was the evil enemy, and they would last forever because that gave us what everyone wanted, a basis for maintaining all of the imperial structures of the free world, as it was called. And when the Soviet Union then fell, finally in 1991, within weeks, they were saying, oh, I knew that was coming. I knew that for years. I said that. And of course, that's all a lie, but who's going to check on them? I went to the Soviet Union for what was, to me, an awakening moment in 1986, and I saw a place that wasn't working, that couldn't last very much longer. And it was a shock to me because I'd grown up in the imperial court world view that the Soviets were, as they said, 10 feet tall and the great threat. And then I go there, and there were major Soviet courtiers kind of pleading with the delegation I was part of that help us, don't desert us. We're not the bad guys. It was a little shocking to me. I mean, they knew what was coming, and it yet the sham was perpetuated in Washington until the very end, and then within an instant, they all said, "Oh, this was all part of the plan. We knew it was going to happen." And yeah, and this is the way it is. That's why you have empires all the way to the brink of collapse, still maintaining that they've got everything all stitched together. Everything will continue as it was.
I need to recover chronology just a little bit because I feel like I'm at sea here when the people who used to support Ukraine suddenly are not supporting Ukraine. In the invasion of winter of 22, it was supposed to be over in 4 days. When that didn't happen, suddenly there were all these voices saying Ukraine's going to win.
Right.
And they put together an offensive for the spring of 23 that was going to overwhelm the Russian forces and drive them back to the sea, or whatever was the version of the sea in 2023.
Right.
And when that didn't happen, the Russians were given credit for, okay, they know how to retreat from Kherson, something like that. Some version. Now it was, if only Europe will step up and properly supply the Ukrainians with what they need to resist nobly the Russian villain. And the Biden administration then played games of, well, we'll give them this weapon, but we won't give them that capability. Back and forth, back and forth. We'll give them this intelligence, but we won't actually help. We'll talk about a no-fly zone, but we won't actually do it. And that went on for, it feels like years, in which the people who are pro-Ukrainian kept reminding us that we can't desert our allies. And if only the Europeans would step up. That's like a chorus we go to, like a Greek drama. If only the Europeans would step up. Here we are, in about to be 26.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is forgotten. It's all washed away. And now we're talking about counselors of the president meeting counselors of the president, Putin and Trump, and finding an end to this, which is not quite victory, but then again favors Russia's ambitions to take Donbass and make it sovereign territory. And one more time, if only the Europeans would step up. Now, is that chronology fit your memory? And do the voices who used to support Ukraine remember what they said then? Or is it just erased from their memory now? All that's left them is, if only Europe would step up.
An empire that is successful and victorious is an empire whose narrative has solidity and integrity, and the narrative matches the strategy, or at least is closely aligned to the strategy.
Right.
Hence, the actions that you take, the battles you fight, correspond to the larger narrative of who we are, what we want, why we fight, and why we must win. And the example of Ukraine, which is to say the example of the U.S. shape-shifting narrative on Ukraine, tells us the opposite, that the U.S. is a very weak and venal empire run by courtiers who are thinking solely in terms of the needs of the emperor and their own positions, and their entire strategy is one of predatory opportunism. Hence, when the Russians' offensive stalled, it was suddenly, that narrative of the Russians is 10 feet tall, and they know how to make war. Oh no, that was all tissue of lies. In fact, they're nothing more than a gas station with nukes. And look at them. They're, again, primitive, brutish uh, uh, society, not even a civilization. And they certainly don't know how to make war anymore. It flipped in an instant, as you said. And the problem is that the major strategic energy of the imperial court is focused on manipulating the American electorate and having their courtier correspondents in Europe manipulate their electorates so that they can do whatever they want. And it is cynical in the sense that it's all a lie. It's simply a pastiche, a paper mache reality that they feed to their people in order to pursue ends that they desire, and those ends are always venal. They always correspond to stuff, resources, or more sway over other peoples, more power, and that's no way to proceed. Powerful empires, in contrast, draw their power from the unity of the people and the leadership and the narrative.
And
the narrative has to, yes.
That's Rome in its good days, what you just said.
Yes, absolutely. It was America in its good day or two. And that's why World War II worked so well, is there was a convergence of narrative with the vision of America itself, not just the vision of the executive, but that of the people since the beginning, since the founding.
Then I should erase my chronology, just put it aside. It's not useful. And go with whatever they're saying now was always going to happen. And
well, it's very much ripped out of the pages of Orwell's 1984. We were always at war with Eurasia. We're always at war with East Asia. The big takeaway for me, and this is at a level that isn't really the primary concern of most people, but perhaps it should be. What I see is that a strategy based on lies and the manipulation of your electorate, your people, is a signal of a failing enterprise, and it is in itself a delegitimating strategy. In other words, if the strategy is cynical and manipulative, by the very nature of the enterprise itself, which demands the opposite of cynicism and manipulation, the fact that the elites are engaged in that means that the enterprise is fatally compromised, and they are actually doing the damage. And that's extremely hard to get across, because you have to be able to look at situations where this, in fact, was the dynamic that brought an empire down, that lapse into cynicism and acquisitiveness, corruption, et cetera, et cetera.
Germanicus and I are puzzling only because we remember what was said in 22, 23, 24. That's our burden. What we're going to speak to now is 26, because there's a new document from the empire, from the emperor himself, a national security strategy that describes the world as it is according to Washington. When we return, this is Friends of History Debating Society in Londinium. I know we haven't pleased the Centurions with that latest bit of courtier business, but they do recognize it, Germanicus.
Mm-hmm.
It's at the worst times of the first century, we had courtiers dictating policy. I mentioned just now and again. Fortunately, we got out of that by accident in the year of 4 emperors, We know there's some bumpy times ahead, but we're going to deal with it. When we come back, the national security strategy for 25-26. This is the Trump policy that we'll see applied in the Americas, in Europe, and Asia. Friends of History Debating Society, I'm Gaius. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius in Londinium with my good friend and counselor, Germanicus. We're in our wine bar by the Thames, which is too cold to even look at. It's cold here early. We've had snow in Londinium. Very odd this time of year. It's not even winter yet. It's still technically fall, but there it is. We are not entertaining the Centurions. They're very unhappy with our first conversation because we didn't come to any resolution. That's the point of courtiers. They never resolve anything. They're always on the right side, the correct side of the argument. Now, the argument used to be, whatever it takes, defend freedom. Now the item is, well, why won't the Europeans step up? That's the argument. So we go to the national security strategy, which I read theoretically is a document prepared by the executive branch that lists the national security concerns and how the administration plans to deal with it. Very straightforward. Nothing unusual about that. It has subsets in it. It was set up in the 20th century, and we continue it into the 21st. The document is released, at least the part that they want us to react to, and there is something new and something old. The old part is the part I like. The Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine. Don't you love this, Germanicus?
I love the fact that the past is still with us, or as has been said, the past is not even past. The continuity is a welcome reminder that American identity is still whole after the assaults on it by the Church of Woke over the last 10 or 12 years. And the reference to the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, ironically made around the time of the 1895 Venezuelan crisis, unearths or brings to light the fact that there are different approaches to America's relationship to the world that have held since the founding. And there are three different approaches that America has taken to the world. And yet the fact that they are different doesn't diminish the fact that they're all of the same nature. In other words, the essence, the font from which they issue forth is unitary. And so in many ways, it is a vision that is quite resonant to the concept of the Trinity in Orthodox Catholicism. And the fact is, the three approaches to the world were created by persons. The first is Washington and his farewell address, and he basically called for America to be a beacon to the world, a source of hope and a guide to the future, but not to be involved and sullied or corrupted by the world. certainly not to become an empire. And that is a very resonant vision. The second one was created, I would say, by Monroe and John Quincy Adams. And this was a vision that staked out America as a kind of realm of liberty. In other words, it was an empire. I mean, the Monroe Doctrine is an imperial document, but it 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 demarcates America as a protected place of liberty. In other words, it's not only a sanctuary, but a a kind of place fortified from the sinful world. And yet, because it is a large realm, as the Western Hemisphere is certainly, then that makes the U.S. An equal contender in the world. In other words, it stakes out the Americas, and the U.S. as a great power. And the third, a vision, is that of Andrew Jackson, and it's a very robust, forceful notion of American empire.
I'm going to go down to South Carolina and hang the first man from the first tree I find. Unless
That's right.
Yes.
And it's unbound. Yeah, Prometheus unbound, ever forceful, ever expanding liberty's standard, which, of course, at the time of Jackson, took the form of manifest destiny and a continental empire, but there was no limit to it. It didn't stop at the shores of the Pacific. In fact, Walt Whitman in 1860 wrote a fantastic poem that talked about America as mistress of the Pacific all the way to China and Japan. And so you could see even early on that this vision will not stop. And so it's interesting, if you want to look at the descent, the lineage of each of these visions. Washington continues through to Ulysses S. Grant, who maintained this restraint and stepping back, and that was a long period after the Civil War, but it wasn't. It was part and parcel of Washington's vision of America and the farewell address. And so you had that continue into the 1930s. You had the Neutrality Acts and what was later called isolationism. But it really was, hey, we see the old world falling apart. We don't want to get entangled in that process.
Also, they lied to us in 1916 and 1917, and we're not.
Oh yeah, and Americans knew that. There was a great backlash to World War I in America, and it was a populist backlash. And so, in a way, America did have to be manipulated into World War II.
And that's still with us. The Europeans are lying to us.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And so, what you see now, in popular terms, but also in Washington, is this notion of restraint, and it absolutely disavows the the accusation of isolationism. It basically says, hey, Washington was right, and we have to remain uncorrupted as a nation and not be. Now, the second one with Monroe and John Quincy Adams, it was completely renewed by Teddy Roosevelt. The Great White Fleet, the corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, the Panama Canal, all of this was announcing to the world that America had not only arrived as a great power, but we were going to show how how we were to highlight our exceptionalism as a model for others through
the new world. Germanicus, you just have to say new world. We stole it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, yeah. But there are two things there. One is the open door policy,
right,
toward China, trying to stop this, ravaging of China by the European powers. And the second was Roosevelt's intervention to stop the Russo-Japanese War and to find a peaceful settlement, for which he got the Nobel Prize. And essentially, that was the counterpoint to the rest of the world, especially the European powers, that went to war in preference to finding peaceful solutions, and he altered this alternative. So in many ways, that is exactly what Trump seeks to be.
Yes,
He
yes,
wants America first, but also we will bring the blessings of a peaceful vision, an exceptional vision as an alternative to your endless wars, Europe, Middle East, etc.
it's somewhere in between, because you have to mention the third version.
Yeah, the third version is Jackson's vision was totally renewed by Woodrow Wilson, and it was not only renewed but taken to the next level, where America would essentially be the leader of the world.
Germanicus, just a moment here. Break. Time out. Have you ever figured out what open covenants openly arrived at means? Is that even English?
Yes, it means a rules-based order. You take rules-based order and that little mantra of Woodrow's, open covenants openly arrived at. That's the same as saying transparency. When I first heard the term transparency, I thought, what the hell is that? It's just drivel. And when they started talking at the beginning of the Ukraine war and for several years after that about a rules-based order, what does that mean? Whose rules? Well, we know whose rules. And so the whole neocon thing is rooted or has grown out of.
Don't skip LBJ.
No, okay. Well, okay. Wilson to Roosevelt to LBJ to Biden is a match. It's like nesting dolls. Biden wanted to be like FDR and LBJ, and LBJ was driven to be like FDR, and so that meant a major war for the renewal. The uplifting of humanity. What is it? The restorer of the world, and it's such a contrast to see this completely uncontrolled vision with absolutely no limits, contrasted to the vision of his successor, which is very much like Teddy Roosevelt's vision. Actually, Trump's vision, with its emphasis on economic arrangements, fits very well into Republican administrations in the 1920s. And you have the Herbert Hoover and Coolidge, and then of course under Harding you had the kind of perfect counterpoint to Wilson, where you had all these arms control agreements. In other words, creating an actual working structure for peace by reducing armaments. I mean, this is all a tradition that goes back, and it is, at the same time, I have to emphasize the fact that all three of these approaches to America's relations with the world are based on this religious vision, the notion of America, the virtuous America as a beacon to the world, or America as the dominus, the master of the world. But they're still essentially moral and theocratic in nature.
All right, let's turn the continents into Christmas cakes, okay? Panettone. I've learned that the Italians love panettone, fruit cake at Christmas time. The U.S., under the Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine, claims all of North America as a panettone and all of South America as a panettone. Is that correct? Have I got it so far?
Yes.
All right. China as a panettone is East Asia and bumps up against India and bumps up against Russia. So it's happy to take East Asia, Southeast Asia, not quite Australia, maybe, and Japan. And then Russia is happy to take what's left of the world island. Well, there's a lot left. And nobody wants Africa. Have I got it right? The African cake goes wanting.
Yes, you do. With one important caveat, I guess, in that the U.S. can have its little cake at a much bigger space, because the U.S. can include the Pacific all the way to Japan and Australia and Korea, I suppose.
But we don't have to. It doesn't. It's not necessary. Remember how we took Hawaii? We just sort of took it a weekend.
Yeah, right. But it's expansive, whereas
right.
China is the most constrained of the three, because you mentioned Russia as well. But China has little elbow room because it abuts against the Philippines, and of course the Taiwan thing has to be resolved. But even if Taiwan was fully reintegrated, it would be difficult for China to throw its weight around and in Southeast Asia, for example, let alone Korea and Japan, who will never bend the knee to China. And then of course there is India, but so that there's less scope. And the Russia's thing, I guess, is to be to widen its orbit into Europe again, and to have a normal relationship there. They're imperial. They're not an imperial expansion kind of nation now. They want respect, and that's the limit of their ambitions at this point.
Putin to Delhi, Putin to Paris, Putin to London. That's all possible.
Yeah, and certainly, but Russia's been really successful with India, and also with Iran.
Okay, now we're talking about a stable environment for the U.S. to prosper, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What's wrong with that? I can't find anything wrong with it. Who's faulting it?
No one's faulting it. I mean, the people who fault it have to, when pressed, will have to fall back on why they fault it. And the answer lies in the fact that it doesn't involve sort of Manichaean struggles of good versus evil, light against the darkness. And sadly, if you look at the Biden, LBJ, Woodrow Wilson, FDR, they're universalist visions that involve big wars. And the counterpoint to that, which you see in Teddy Roosevelt, of course, and going back to the early days of the Republic, is America first, meaning America's primary interests are with our own nation and our own realm. And also, we want to live in peace because that's how we're going to make money. And it is a contrast.
Right now, Reuters. The Kremlin on Sunday said, welcomed U.S. President Donald Trump's new national security strategy, and said it largely accorded with Russia's own perceptions. The first time that Moscow has so praised such a document from its former Cold War foe. The U.S. national security strategy described Trump's vision as one of flexible realism. That's a good one. That's new. And argued that the U.S. should revive the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, which declared the Western Hemisphere to be Washington's zone of influence. Okay. October 1942, FDR making a fireside chat. 42 year was a rough one. We had a lot of surprises. And things were going well at the end of 42, but there was a second front ahead. and that wasn't quite clear what they were going to do in 43. However, the president took time to praise our ally, Joe Stalin. We're coming back to that, Germanicus, to praise our ally, Vladimir Putin.
Well, you know, Abraham Lincoln praised the Tsar for freeing the serfs.
Right.
So, and then the U.S. praised Russia for, in effect, saving the Union from a war with Britain and France. So
the courtiers see this is where we're headed, and they're scrambling to get there first. Is that what's going on with some of them?
If it's successful, and I think it is going to be successful, because essentially the Teddy Roosevelt Trumpian vision is more aligned with the desires of the American people. And the American people, above all, and that's part of the reason that Mr. Trump was elected twice, is that they don't want any more wars. They've had 25 years of war, and they don't want it anymore.
And they want to make money.
And of course, it remains the great burden of the universalist Marshall vision that you have to somehow explain why war is the best way.
And the Jackson, Wilson, LBJ Biden school, they're not going to disappear. Where are they hiding?
Well, they're hiding in plain sight. Look at the Secretary of State, for example. I mean, it's difficult to thread the needle, and that's what the emperor is attempting to do.
And he will be condemned for it the way you can in between. So, but as a sphere of influence, that would mean that that is necessary. The first thing must happen is Caracas, and then Havana. Is Havana on the shopping list?
Well, I hope not. You know, the look, El Presidente Scheinbaum just roundly she didn't denounce the emperor, but she said that it's not going to happen, meaning American military strikes going after drug dealers in Mexico itself is not going to happen, that she's not going to be coerced. And I think that that's a good signal to send, is that if we do want to have a fruitful relationship with Latin America, then we'd better not start throwing our weight around too much.
Our Roman lesson when we return. How do you deal with an enemy you've defeated? What is the course that Rome recommends? When we come back, Germanicus, Gaius, Londinium, 91 AD, wintertime, and our centurions are smiling. They know what's coming. Friends of History Debating Society. We'll be right back. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius with Germanicus, and a small lesson from Rome, passed to the 21st century. Once upon a time was a condition where Rome was an absolute master of the Mediterranean basin. This is before the conquest of Carthage. This is even before the Roman legions were always successful. There were times they were defeated and pushed back by the tribes of the Italian peninsula. And I think it was during the Samnite War, I haven't checked which one, there was a battle lost by the Roman legions. They lost the battle. And the victor, one of the warlords, went to his father and said, "What shall I do with them?" Shall I make them our ally, or shall I kill them all? And the father said, those are your good choices. Bad choice would be to make them obey you and make promises to you, because that will end badly. Well, the way it turned out, oddly, was the son decided to apply the third method, to make them friends by showing mercy. What a mistake that was, because the Romans rebuilt their army and came back and obliterated the son, the father, the village, everything. So much so that it's not even a distinct memory. And I've been over it many times. That's the Roman lesson. And Germanicus, I just mentioned it quickly because it's shocking how many times America has not got that lesson correctly, that it tries to find a third way. Why? Do we know what's in the American spirit? Is this liberty thing? Is that what corrupts them?
Well, it's a form of narcissism when you really think about it, because at Caudine Forks, where the Roman army had been surprised and captured by the Samnites, the Samnites spared their lives, but then decided to force every Roman citizen, legionary soldier, to ritually pass under the yoke. In other words, this was a ritual of abject submission, and it was a shameful rite that was enacted there, and that could have no there could be no outcome but what the Romans eventually did. And so the Samnites wanted their narcissism. They wanted to feel, not they'd already won, but they wanted to feel as though they had cemented dominance forever. And this is very much like what the Allies did at the end of World War I. The Germans went in asking for an armistice, and it was called an armistice, but it was really a submission. And then the whole process of the Treaty of Versailles was very much a ritual humiliation, and it went on year after year after year, with inspectors all over Germany seeing if they were cheating on armaments. The whole humiliation of not being able to have enough military capability to even defend yourself, and that was going to ensure what happened. This happens time and time again. And what the U.S. has done, in a slightly different way, is that it wants, as you put it, it wants an outcome where people are totally defeated, but somehow you can be friends. And this is the approach that worked with Japan and Germany, but it worked primarily because both those countries were exhausted and
they were smashed. Germanicus, the vision of Berlin in July of '45, yeah, when Truman toured it, there wasn't a building that stood. There wasn't a window that wasn't blown out. It was right. Bricks. The city was bricks.
Well, going back to Caudine Forks, that was the fork in the road for the Romans, that they decided after that experience that they would not, the enemy must be destroyed, and that otherwise it would come back again and again.
And what the Americans didn't do with Hanoi, what they didn't do with Korea, what they didn't do with Iraq, what they didn't do with Afghanistan.
Oh, definitely.
Let's turn it into bricks, because if it's bricks, it becomes obedient. If it's not bricks, it comes back. And we've seen each of that. Right now, Iran is firing missiles into the Straits of Hormuz as practice.
Mm-hmm.
That's because the Trump corollary didn't quite work there. B-2 raid, he needed to kill the Ayatollah. That's what the Romans would have done.
Well, yeah, but that was a ritual ceremonial action or act. And I think the US did it in cahoots with Iran because the real problem was Israel, and the US was getting boxed into a war with Iran, and it didn't want to do that. And the Iranians didn't want that either for obvious reasons, or maybe not so obvious reasons. They're not well fixed at the moment to have a major war. And I think there was, there was a under the table agreement between the US and Iran to create a show, an act of theater, a ritual ceremonial thing that would allow both Iran and the US to escape the war that Israel so desperately wanted at that moment. So, but generally, we don't want to bring down our virtue. I mean, we don't want to disappoint the myth about America as the Redeemer nation, and so we've hesitated.
Did we let Moscow get up off the mat?
You mean after the fall of the Soviet Union?
After the humiliation of Gorbachev, yes.
We handled that poorly because they were totally beaten, mostly by themselves, by
We
the nature.
fixed the 96 election to give it to Yeltsin.
Yeah, we did. And then we started this remorseless NATO expansion. And that was a big mistake, because the fact is that we, unlike these other situations the Romans faced, or we faced with Germany and Japan, I mean, Russia was Soviet Union, was not our enemy. And it wasn't really a war. And we kept insisting that it be a war, Cold War. And we looked at the coming apart of the Soviet Union as a U.S. victory, as though we had defeated Russia in a war. And that was not necessary. This wasn't what was going on. We could have brought Russia into NATO, for example, and then that would have solved everything. We weren't dealing with.
All right, what are they going to do right now? Let's not just quickly.
Oh, well, what's going to happen now is that ideally, Mr. Trump will do what should have been done in 1991.
Is he going to kill Maduro?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Russia. No,
Russia is fine. I just want to know whether we're going to go for the kill or whether we're going to bring him under the yoke and claim its victory.
I can't say. I would think the best outcome would be a submission, as a client king would do.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, this is unfathomable. There are so many risks to this, but hey, we'll see.
But can we agree that if he brings them under the yoke, they will bite back?
I'm not sure, because the situation in Venezuela is tenuous for the regime ultimately. It's the
hand of China in every capital in the Americas.
Right, but it's better to weaken him and then let change happen on its own, I think, than to do something that will bring back all the unhappy memories that other.
Look behind you, Germanicus. We have centurions shaking their heads no.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you can do it, but we've done that in the past, and it's kind of backfired every time. So I'm not, this isn't a war. If you're fighting a war, you can, bring the enemy to their knees and then raise them up only after they have completely submitted.
One more scenario. One more scenario, because these are, as you say, unfathomable. Britain, in the case of Starmer, and Macron for Paris, and I believe Merz will be there for Germany. Our meeting with Zelensky tomorrow in London. What to do? What
to make trouble. They don't want to stop being aggressive dependents. Their passive aggressive approach to the U.S. Is a strategic liability.
They condemn us more than they condemn Moscow.
Yes, because they hate us, but they desperately want us to protect them, and they will do anything for us, but they'll scream at us the whole way. And it only reinforces what is in the national security strategy. When the NSS talks about Europe as, heading toward its own undoing,
right?
Their behavior only reinforces that judgment. So but they want the U.S. to stay engaged in this war, because when the war ends and Russia's the clear victor, and there's no further claim that these European leaders will have on their people saying, "Oh, we're in a crisis, you must do as we say," then they're going to start coming apart or coming down. Macron, Merz, and of course Starmer. I mean, they've created a pathway that is going to lead to their destruction, and they just want to put it off as long as they can. As does Zelensky.
You could have made that same remark in the Christmas of 1916. Same remark.
Yeah, I know.
Don't listen to the Zimmerman telegram. Same remark. All of a sudden, we have a weakness. We fall for that French stuff.
Yeah, we'll see.
Germanicus is Vlahos. We've had fun. The Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine. Try that one quickly. You have to slow down to say it. And then everybody goes, huh? Who? And John Quincy Adams, there's a trivia test. Smartest president we ever had, could read 9 languages. Ambassador to the court of Catherine the Great. The son of a president. The master of the Libertad. A man who lived a totally virtuous life and was a terrible president because he was up against Andrew Jackson. That's a man with 2 bullets in him and a temper. That was it.
He was a great Secretary of State. I mean,
yes.
he got 1 million square miles from Mexico without having to fight a war. So anyway.
Adams was a smart man, and gosh, he was well prepared because his father took him everywhere. He was at the 83 Priest Conference as a child. Germanicus is Vlahos. I am Gaius, John Batchelor, Londinium. Thank you for listening to our wanderings around the map and the centuries. It's great fun for us. Remember, Rome's lessons. Do not do the halfway yoke thing, or they'll bite you in the back. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. Until next week, thank you.